All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today as we explore how to streamline member and chapter roster management with CSI's Roster Manager. As you know, I'm JT Fiedler. I'm the Product and Sales Advisor here at CSI, and I'm joined by Elizabeth Wojcik, who is not only the Director of Business Development, but also the product owner of Roster Manager. So you got a different face instead of just me and Doug. So obviously we want to be respectful of your time. So I know Doug likes to say, just like when boarding a plane, they confirm your destination and give you a chance to get off. So here's your chance to get the next 45 minutes of your life back. Roster Manager does require you to be on IMS EMS Enterprise. So if you're not planning on upgrading to it, then this won't work. But if it is something you're working on or you're on EMS today, you can take advantage of Roster Manager. Roster Manager is an IMS iPart that is designed to obviously make the management of your rosters easier. It also allows you to make updates to multiple profiles in a single go. And it gives you the ability to extend who can actually make changes to your given rosters in IMS. So we'll go and we're going to go through some various use cases and explore how Roster Manager can streamline those processes that you might have. First use case is removing members from a roster. So in a perfect world, we would want to track as much information as possible when making this update to a member or a given roster. In this initial use case, I'm going to just simply change a handful of individuals on a given roster to update their status as inactive. Elizabeth will show what that looks like in Roster Manager and kind of the additional insights. But how the old way of doing things, how it looks today without Roster Manager, is you would just obviously go into each one and update their status. Obviously, you can see that this is sped up. I'm not this quick, but this is sped up 5 times. So it took about 5 minutes to do to update. I think it was roughly 10-ish people. Obviously, I am just picking random people, so that sped up the process as well. If you have a list and you are looking for certain individuals, then this is going to be even lengthier process. So that is one thing to mention. This is kind of the old way of doing it. So I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth to explore how this looks on the Roster Manager front. Elizabeth, over to
Thanks,
you.
JT. Yeah, so certainly that is kind of what we would call the old method, and it's fine, it's great, whatever. But a couple things that we didn't get. So if we wanted to know why are these people being removed from the roster, why are they being deactivated, we don't know. We just see their status change in the change log. We know we could tell maybe who did it, but that's really about it. So definitely Roster Manager is going to give you that ability to collect that additional valuable info. So that's really important. The other things I want to point out with the example JT showed is certainly he did it on the staff side of things, which is fine. Now, many of you know that functionality can be on the member side as well, where a company admin could go to like that contacts list and be able to update their status just like JT did. Again, all fine, but not necessarily a very intuitive process. They kind of have to know where to go and what to click to change that person's status. Couple other areas that Roster Manager may help is, like JT said, he picked some random people, so it made that faster. Obviously, the person making that base would be intentional about who they're picking, but you can see that contacts list shows everybody connected to that organization, no matter status. So Roster Manager is also going to give us the ability to specify who is eligible for this applicable action. So I want to remove them from my roster or deactivate them, that means they're not already removed from a roster or deactivated. So a couple things that this is gonna add. So that is all controlled within an IQA. So the information you see on this slide is, consider this like a mapping. Any cases you want to do actions, even on your own website, you want to, think about what is it that we need to do, who is eligible for this particular workflow or action, what are the requirements, and then what do we need to know? And then obviously, finally, what needs to happen after this action is complete. So let's take a look at what this is going to look like in Roster Manager. So on the next slide, we have a video. I did not speed this up, so this is real time. So I'm logged in as Alex. He's a company admin for Versaton. I'm just navigating him to his company profile, showing him some roster lists, just some IQAs that shows him his active members. And then I'm going to a tab, this is a content collection organizer, to pick people that I want to deactivate. Again, this is an IQA showing the eligible people in the fields I want to show. And then I'm just picking some dates. I can hit apply to all if the date's all the same. And then I'm just typing in some reasons. You can see some are required, some are not required. That would be according to your rules and what you want to, get from that person. But then I'm done. That was maybe 30 seconds for 3 members. That's pretty cool. So to confirm my updates processed, I can go back to my rosters and see those people that were on the active list are now under inactive. And then I could even jump on the staff side of things and see that member that we updated, or one of them, is now set to inactive. And I can even show the details. So I stored some details about this action to say what the action type was, the effective date, that reason that they put in. So again, I have that now that I can do some analysis on later. All right, let's take a little different kind of use case here. So again, roster manager is not just about changing member types or changing statuses. It's about reporting things about a member on your organization. So in this example, we're going to do a very similar process, but our intention is to identify people who are interested in volunteering. Now, we know there's some volunteer interest forms in IMIS that we could use, but maybe we need it to come from that company admin or chapter administrator to say, we had a meeting, we had a little sign-in sheet just because that was easy, and people signed up on that list, and I'm just like reporting and tracking who, said they were interested. So obviously they're, members of my organization, they're active, and maybe they even attended the event that we just held. So, and then I'm just going to ask, what role are they interested in, and obviously what date that they expressed that interest. Now, what I'm going to do with this, on the previous action, we just updated status and we, stored that date and reason. But in this case, I'm going to actually insert an activity in Timus. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So I'm still logged in as Alex. I'm just choosing a different tab where I have this action for volunteer interest. My QA again shows the eligible people, so I'm going to pick a few examples. And in this case, I'm just asking them one question. What role are they interested in? So again, this is the company admin putting on there, what they are interested in. And then I'm done. So again, I could certainly show that back to that company administrator on that organization profile as reported activities, but I could also see it on the staff side of things where, again, I can see who expressed interest, what role are they interested in, and even who reported it. So it went a little fast at the end, but the other data pieces we can collect is who's logged in. So Alex was logged in, what company they are on at the time of that update, because certainly people can change companies or chapters. So you might want to know what organization were they tied to back then, which is good. All right, one more example. So if we want to talk about other updates we can do, again, it can be basically anything. So in this case, we're doing it a little bit further. So we want to know if members receive some sort of accreditation locally. And again, this is the company admin or chapter admin reporting this activity. So I want to know who's accredited or who just received accreditation. Obviously the requirements are they're connected to my organization, they're active, they're maybe not already accredited. And then I want to know what date they were accredited as well as the type. So again, I'm going to collect that data. And based on those actions, I'm going to do a couple things. In my organization, that actually changes their member type, which then changes their applicable dues. So I'm going to update member type. I'm also going to update some panel source data to, again, store that date and type and who reported it. And then I'm also going to insert an activity because I just want another way to show that accreditation was received for that member. So let's take a look what that looks like. So again, same process, just a different tab. I'm going to the update accreditation. Similar process here, the IQA is displaying the list and the fields you see. So I'm picking a few members and continuing on and inserting the date they received. This might be a case where you don't want to do the apply to all because sometimes those dates aren't the same. And certainly those can be text boxes, file uploads, whatever you need to do and collect on there. And again, I can immediately see it changed the member type, it updated some panel source data, and it inserted an activity. So the screen's just a little slower. So on the participation tab, here's my activity. We checked who reported it in the organization at the time that they were connected to at the time of reporting. So again, very, very easy. You can see dependent on how many, actions you have and so forth. It's really, really easy and intuitive to know where to go. I see a question in the chat about drop-down values. So those additional info questions on that step 2 can be anything. It could be a checkbox, it could be a text box, date, drop-down fields, file uploads, anything you need. So in some cases, in that case, actually for accreditation, I'm using a gen table as my source table, but I could also use an IQA as my drop-down list if you need it to be dynamic. So 3 super quick and easy examples, but let's just kind of backtrack a little bit about what kind of those key features are. So again, we're managing rosters and all that, and that's great, the speeding up our process. But the main things I like to talk about with Roster Manager is the level of control that you have. So in these key features, we have the ability to define requirements. So that means I have an IQA that is defining the eligibility requirements for the action that I have on the page. So each time you use the Roster Manager iPart, you're saying for this action, let's say voluntary interest, here are the people that are eligible for selection to that action. So I'm just defining that with an IQA. So those are my requirements. And then the next thing is that additional info, all that data that you're potentially missing by them just updating status or inserting an activity. Again, this is like cueing them to know based on the action that they selected, what do I need to know? And again, thinking about and having that map about, what data that you need, what data you might want to run some analytics on or put on a dashboard. Again, this additional information is very, very helpful. And then finally, the update. So, many of you on this call might have IDMS with all its great activities and functions. So Roster Manager is doing a lot of those same things, but it's built within that iPart. So if I'm updating panel source data, if I'm inserting activity, panel source data is including like updating member type or status, any of those panel sources. That happens instantly. So when that person hits submit after the action's complete, these things are happening instantly, which is great. I even have the ability, and I didn't do a sample, but I could insert a subscription. So if the action is, has an applicable subscription related to it, Roster Manager can insert that subscription. We are working on other enhancements like inserting orders, other enhancements. Would love any other suggestions for enhancements as well. But again, just extending the ability to automatically do those updates when they select. So I see a question on what's gonna, if one of the panels fields is no longer with company, can this remove the individual's co-ID or replace the co-ID? Absolutely. So in cases where the action is removing people from a roster, you can update any of those panel source fields. So in that scenario, you'd be updating the CS contact panel source and updating co-ID to either be blank or maybe like a default company that you're moving them to as a temporary state. But any of those fields available in those panel sources, you can update and modify. Great question. So, great segue into some of the things we wanted to ask the group here. So, certainly we showed kind of from roster manager from the end user's perspective and how easy it is to use. So, what are some things that maybe influenced you to sign up for this webinar? What are some challenges that you're facing today with groups updating their applicable rosters and maybe like reporting data to you? Feel free to put things in the chat. We'd love to kind of see, what are some of the challenges? I'm sure there's might be cases where staff is doing a lot of updates, and I'm sure they have better things to do. um, Duplicate entries, absolutely. So duplicate entries is a good example. So when we have the requirement setting, so an IQA in that regard, we're able to identify, in that accreditation example is a good one. Have they already been reported? Have they already been selected? Have they already been modified? Again, that can be a setting in your IQA where they're not going to be shown to be selected again. So that would certainly help in reducing duplicate entries. Multi-tiered company members, so roster manager may see individuals from multiple companies. Yes, so the IQA in the examples I showed, since I was navigating them to the company profile, I was using the URL parameter in my IQA to say, show those people connected to that company. You don't have to do that. You can show anyone in that IQA. You can even have it searchable. So if they need to be able to search by name, let's say they want to move someone on a different company roster to their roster, they can search for that person, again, meeting the eligibility requirements, and have their co-ID or whatever connection you have to that organization. So that's a good one. Let's see. If members change their record, does the change happen immediately, or is there an opportunity for staff to review? So in these cases, it's up to your rules. So in these examples I did, I had those changes happen immediately. But if it is a situation where someone needs to look at that change before, again, maybe like the member type changes, you can still do the things like write an activity, update a panel source, and maybe that appears like on a dashboard page or kind of task list page for staff to then review and then maybe push through the final change if needed. So again, whatever your updates you want to happen post change can certainly be done. We have a committee chair that selects all appointments for the following year. Would this help streamline the process for him, showing volunteer requests, current positions, past requests? That's a good example. I've actually been playing with using Roster Manager to basically manage a committee. So no offense to ASI, but the committee, admin or committee interface is not great. You can't customize the title list or position list. So with the roster manager, you could, right? So we'll have an IQA of people eligible to put in roles. And then I'd have some drop-down lists of the eligible positions based on where I'm using this. So I can definitely insert committee activities. So that would mean putting people on a committee with current effective dates or future effective dates, or maybe it's putting them on a possible or potential committee list. One update that we are going to work on for roster manager is the ability to update an activity. So let's say I need to remove someone from a committee roster. That's kind of the use case we're using of, could I update their end date or something like that to remove them? So that's actually a good example, Jill. Could this be implemented for company admins to select the next company admin? Sure. If it's something that you need the company admin to do. Now, certainly companies can have multiple company admins. So it's not limited to that, but in cases where you might have some rules where certain people in certain positions on the organization's committee automatically get that company admin role. You could certainly have an IDMS, iSchedule job, doing that automatically for you, finding those new eligible people. So in that case, you might be using Roster Manager to identify like, hey, here's the next company admin. In that scenario, I think we might still need IDMS to do the extra step of inserting that relationship. But I'll actually take that back to the product team. That's a good example of where roster manager might be able to assist and do more in that regard. That's a good one. Is it possible to limit the number of rosters based on company member type or category? Sure. Again, because you're using an IQA to define who is appearing in your list, or again, who is eligible for the action, you're defining what rosters you're showing, what member types are included in that roster. So for example, like that accreditation example, I didn't want to show people that had already been, reported as accredited. So in that list, they didn't see people that again have already been reported. Member, we changed their member type. So I was just showing member types that have not been identified as accredited. So that's a good example. Other examples. For multi-tiered company rosters, how do they need to be linked in order to show up? Great question. I'm happy to follow up with you, Connie, on the documentation and the help site. The company admin role is technically a relationship type, which seems weird, but that's what it is. I'm happy to follow up with you and kind of show you some examples of like how we are doing the insert of that relationship or update of that relationship with IDMS. So that's a good example. Okay. Let's see. Oop, do we have any screenshots of where we set up the rules and logic? Oh, great. Great segue again. I was going to see if we had enough time. I was going to show you behind the curtain. So hold tight, Jennifer. Can this be tied to payment? Our current setup is custom coded to allow company admin to make changes to the chapter roster and then subsequently pay the dues for the member. So that is something we are looking at, the ability to like insert a subscription or insert an order and then like immediately kind of go to your cart to check out. So that is something, Maria, that we are looking into adding to Roster Manager. So we don't use company admin. It would be for our staff making this change. Absolutely. So with Roster Manager, again, it's just an I part. So whatever page you put it on, you would have the applicable security on that page to make the change. So if it's staff, again, if it's like certain positions on a organization or chapter roster that can have access to do these changes, you can give whoever you need to the access to the page, and therefore they can make and use the roster manager action.
We do have some questions in the Q&A
Oh,
that
perfect.
I'll just voice. So Jill, I'm guessing this is back to what you mentioned in the chat, but can previous years' interests be included in this report? For example, if we send out volunteer requests for 2025, can we see what other committees they were interested in 2022, 2023, 2024, etc.?
Sure, that might be in your IQA output. So on that selection screen, you might see or might show some like historical request as other columns, which might be some logic within your IQA that you can show that ability. But again, you might show them a different report. Like in that case, I had their active and inactive rosters on another tab, which were just IQAs. I might be able to show them that data and then navigate them to a roster manager page where they can perform the updates. But that IQA, the columns that you show or display on your IQA can be whatever you need to pull from IMUS.
Another one, can you review how this would be used to change the co-ID and member type, and does that write to the change log?
Great. Okay, so a couple things with, and I'll show you this in the background where you're able to define again the fields you want to update. So in these cases, it would be the co-ID and member type from CS Contact. The change log would be tracked. So any changes that are happening on any of your logged fields is going to show normally. So member type change, it would show that. You might not be change logging all of your panel source fields, so those might not show, but you can certainly abide by those settings when setting up the panel source, and those would show as well.
All right. And then the last one of the challenges we have is updating members when emails no longer are sent from Higher Logic because the member is no longer at the organization. Could the roster management update members in this IQA automatically, or perhaps send an email to the company admin to say, here are potential inactive members, and to allow them to make inactive or update email address?
I think that would be more of a function of like process automation. So with process automation, you would have the ability to set an IQA. That might be hard to identify an IQA if they're no longer there. That is an ongoing challenge that many of our groups have, but certainly maybe having scheduled consistent reminders to those company or chapter admins to update email addresses. Now, Roster Manager could certainly help them update email addresses en masse. So if they wanted to pick a few people in that list and that additional info question is, updated email, that could then replace their email address on their profile as an updated email. So that's a good example. So JT, we didn't practice this, but if you don't mind, if I could share my screen,
Yes.
I can show behind the curtain a little bit. Okay, share screen. Okay, perfect. So right now I'm just in my demo site in IMIS, and obviously I'm in the staff site. So one quick thing I wanted to show you is some of the IQAs that I was using on those selection steps. So for example, the removing or deactivating members, let's do edit here. And in this case, I just have, again, an IQA. I have a little note that says it's being used in a roster manager iPart. I'm just pulling in from net contact data and then pulling in member type so I can have the description. I have some filters. So like I said, I'm using that URL parameter filter because I had it on a page where I'm on the company profile. And then I just have the status is active. So on display, this is again where you might want to say, I want to add some other information. So again, whatever sources you need to pull in, whatever alias column headers, that's all fine. I have ID coming in here because I'm going to use that. So sometimes you might want some pieces of data in your IQA that you're going to use in order to know like what areas to update and so forth. In this case, I'm pulling an ID because this is the record or the person they picked. So I want to make sure I have their ID. So that's just an IQA example. So if I look at a content page where that is being used, so this is the content page on my actually second tab where it says inactivate members. So if I go in and look at that content page, I'm going to see the CSI logo shortly. This is the roster manager iPart. So this is just a iPart that once you purchase roster manager, you'll have it in your custom folder. So once you have that in your system, you can add this iPart to the page. And so this is what it's going to look like when you first configure it. So I have a couple options. I have my selection step. So think about that was my first step. This is my IQA. So here's the IQA that I'm using to display my eligible members. So this is my requirements part. The information tab is the questions I want to ask. So on this side, on the edit form side, I'm specifying the questions. I put my label, I put my property type. You can see all the options here. And then in cases where, again, I want predefined values, I might say, define a query to do the drop-down list or use a source table. I can allow multi-selection. I can make it a required field, a multi-line text box. I can even use regular expression, which is helpful for like email addresses or phone numbers. You want to make sure they're in the right format. You can actually use some regular expression. And then apply to value to all option. So this is just allowing them to hit that apply to all button. in cases where it may be very typical that everybody's going to have the same effective date. That might not be the cases for all actions. And then order position is where you can just kind of move things around. The confirmation step is what they're going to see on that last step. So you can certainly put a custom message. You can even redirect them on submission. So that might be a case where we send them to the page where they need to add things to their cart or something like that. They could do that. And then workflow, this is where the magic happens. So I'm setting a couple things on the front end. I'm telling the system who is the selected ID, meaning the person they picked. So in that case, that's where my code ID for my query is coming into play. So I'm saying, here's in my query, this is the field I want you to use to say whose record am I updating. And then down here, my options, these are my updating panel sources, creating activities, or creating subscriptions. I can do all of the above in one action. And once I select the panel, so in this case, I picked CS Contact. In each of these, just like in IDMS, you want to have the key field, right? So typically that's ID. So same with this, you want to say, I'm updating CS Contact where ID matches the code ID on my query, which again, it's the person. And then I'm saying, update their status to I. I could also do other things like dynamic. So I have dynamic, I can pull in what's today's date and time, who's the logged in user, who's the selected ID, which again should be the ID for my query. And then I can also use URL parameters. So I can pull what ID is in my URL. Maybe it's an event key, maybe it's a product code, maybe it's a group ID, engagement score ID. We just pulled all these fields from the API. So this example down here is I'm updating panel data. Now this is if you go to the doc site, you'll see this table, and this is just an optional table. I created this table as I want every action that goes through Roster Manager. I want it to put data in this table, again, to where I could run some stats on how many actions were done, what were the action types, all those things. So again, I'm just saying, put this data in the ID, where it's in my query, give it an action name, put the effective date field in a date field, put the reason in a text field, set transaction date to be current date, all those things, again, just whatever you needed to set. So in one of our questions, like how do I update member type or co-ID? So same concept here, where I would just pick the property. So in this case, I might say add property and select company ID. And again, this might be where I need to either, clear it out or set it to be some other, default random value, whatever I need to do. Same goes for if I need to update the member type, I could do that. One thing that I have seen some groups do with member type is actually have some logic in your query that analyzes, well, maybe their member type is this. If that's the case, then it should be this. Whatever you have in your query could be used in your mapping. So I might have another, code established, member type formula or whatever, and I could just use that. So it doesn't always have to just be plain text. Okay. But again, I just have content page, each of these, I have update accreditation, same concept here. I have my I part. The only thing a little different on here was just that it had a different question. On the information step, I just had accreditation date and accreditation type. So here's where I have it linked to a source table. And then again, just a little bit different on my workflow that I'm changing their member type. I'm creating an activity. The activity type is accred and setting the values in the activity. So again, this workflow tab is like your mapping of what do you want to happen, very, very similar to what you would be doing in IDMS and the mapping there as well. Okay, now I could talk about this all day, but I know JT wants to cut me off. So I'll stop sharing and hand it back to him.
Right. Thank you for showing behind the scenes. All right. Some things came into the chat. This is fabulous. Thanks for the demo. And then can you talk more about the process if there needs to be a staff review before implementing
Yeah.
changes?
Jennifer, I could set up a scenario of what I think you're trying to accomplish and send you a short video or hop on a call if you're willing. I think I know what you're trying to accomplish, but what I can do is in my demo site set up kind of that example workflow and be able to give you that kind of context.
And then another one.
Correct.
So this would all be handled within IMIS, not separately as IDMS does, correct?
Correct. So all those updates I'm doing is just in the roster and manager I part. I do not need IDMS, although JT would love for you to have IDMS. There might be some other things again that I want to use IDMS for. Maybe I'm just using roster manager to insert activity, and then I want to do some other things with IDMS later. You could certainly do that. But again, if you're able to do it with roster manager and you want that immediate update, I would highly recommend doing it there. Perfect.
All right.
Awesome.
So just some important links. All of our documentation can be found at docs.csiinc.com. So if you have any questions or want to dive into the roster manager documentation, you can find it there. We do have a listserv, so you can join just by typing csi.ms/listserv. And it's just a collaborative environment where you could bounce ideas off of one another and see how other people and other organizations are using CSI tools. If you do have, obviously, any of our products, support is included with our annual subscriptions. So any how-to questions or, hey, I'm running into this error, can you help me out? You can always send those to support@csiinc.com. And if you are interested in licensing roster manager or have additional questions, you can always reach out to sales@csiinc.com and I can pass along some additional information. Another heads up, the IMIS users group is having a conference next week. So if you haven't registered for that, you can use code roll_back to get a discount. And so this is obviously IUG, it's users group. So it's great to learn how you can continue to improve your use of IMIS and link with other active IMS users and see how they're doing it. And it's great training. So if you're new to IMS, it's a great opportunity to kind of get more familiar with IMS in general. Then just quickly touching on some of our upcoming webinars. October 8th, we'll be having an IDMS webinar. So if you are interested in learning more about IDMS, you can register for that. In November, we're going to be touching on email and text manager. So really focusing on engaging with members through various channels, communication channels that you have the ability to use. And then December 10th, this is going to be kind of a quick hit of all CSI products. So if you have interest in a specific CSI product, feel free to register for that December one. Once again, like all of our webinars, if you register, you'll get a recording. So if you can't make it, you can still register and I'll pass over that recording so you can get that information that you missed. With that, I know we've been answering questions already, but any other kind of last minute questions that people have? We'll give it a little bit more. Let me just open Q&A. So I'm not seeing anything on the Q&A front. Chat does not have any questions as well. So with that, we'll go ahead, wrap things up. If you do have any questions after the call, feel free to reach out to the sales@csiinc.com and we can address those as they come up. Thanks
Thanks,
everyone
everyone.
for
Have a good
joining.
day.